What's up, everybody? It's Braxton. I'm in my garage. It's pretty hot and I'm about to sand a bowl. So I figured I would do a video on sanding. I mentioned a little while back on my how to apply OB shine juice video that if you want to see how I sand, let me know. A few people said they wanted to see it, so here's the video. Hope you enjoy it. If I'm going to be hand sanding a bowl, I like to use a little piece of sanding sponge that I cut down. The sponge really helps to absorb the heat. If you just sand it without using that sponge, it can get super hot. I like to use cling spore paper. It's like a cloth back. It works really well. I wrap it around the sponge nice and tight. I usually leave a little bit of excess so I can get a good grip on it, and then also have plenty of sandpaper. Next, I turn the lathe on, kind of a low RPM, maybe 500 or so, and I start with the rim of the bowl. They can get pretty sharp, so if I'm going to have my hand reaching in there, I kind of want to soften those curves, because if you're not careful, you get sliced. No matter what grit I start with, the first grit is always the most important one. That's going to be your lowest grit, and that's what you're using to sand out all those tool marks or high spots or lumps or whatever. I know you guys are excellent turners and you don't have any of those, but for me, sometimes, hey, you got to break out the 80 grit bowl gouge. After I feel like I've sanded for a sufficient amount of time, I'll shut off the lathe and check the progress. You know, kind of get in there and feel it. I'll turn my paper if it's getting kind of worn out. That's one of the bonuses of putting a little bit of extra paper on there. You can turn it a few times and get some more use out of it. Turn the lathe back on and then continue sanding the spots that felt like they needed it until it's, you know, nice and smooth on there. That's the one thing you want to make sure. You do all your heavy sanding with the lowest grits, and then you use the rest of the grits to just kind of clean up all the sanding marks from the first grit. Once I'm happy with how everything's looking, there's no more lumps or bumps, everything feels good, then I'll switch to the next grit and continue on. Between grits, I like to switch the direction of the lathe. So for the first grit, I'll go forward, and then when I go to the next grit, I'll reverse the lathe. I feel like this kind of gives you a better finish in the end if you're able to reverse the lathe between grits. I know not everybody has a lathe with reverse on it, so it's not a big deal if you don't. Just continue on through the grits like normal. And no matter if I'm sanding forward or in reverse, I always like to stay close to the center line. If I'm in reverse, I might go slightly above the center line of the bowl. If I'm in forward, then I'll go slightly below the center line of the bowl. But if you deviate too far from that, it can get a little sketchy, especially in more enclosed bowls. So just keep that in mind when you got your hands inside a bowl that's spinning super fast. And at this point, all you're really doing is just repeating the process with progressively finer grits. So I'll go through a grit, stop the lathe, check it out, see how it's feeling. If it needs a little bit more, I'll turn the lathe back on and go to town with that one until I get to 400, which is one below where I like to stop, 600 grit. At that point, I take some denatured alcohol, a little spray bottle, and spray it on to raise the grain, and then have a little fun with all the trolls out there. This is a Jimmy Clewes signature right here. I always see Jimmy do this, and he's had a huge influence on my turning, so shout out Jimmy Clewes. You're awesome. I love you, buddy. I'll leave a link to his website in the description below. Be sure to check him out. Now, whether you light it on fire or not, rubbing alcohol is a lot better for raising the grain than regular water is because of how fast that it dissipates. That way you can get on to the final grit quicker because, let's face it, sanding is not that fun. For me, the final step is to grab my air compressor and blow out all the dust in there, try to clean out the pores of the wood as well as I can. This one has a few cracks in there, which I'm going to be filling with some synthetic sand, so keep an eye out for that video. It's really cool stuff. It's a product from Jimmy Clewes, actually. I mentioned him earlier. It's great stuff, and it's a really nice way to kind of enhance cracks rather than trying to hide them and filling them with, you know, sawdust and glue. And instead of a finish here, I'm applying sanding sealer, and that's because I'm going to put the synthetic sand in those cracks. But if I didn't have any cracks to fill, I'd just be applying a finish right now. My favorite finish is OB's Shine Juice. If you aren't familiar with it, I'll leave you a link to my video on how to apply it. It's a really great, straightforward, easy finish. One of my favorites. But that's it for my sanding process. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button, give me a comment, give me a thumbs up, let me know what you think. Share it around with your friends, and we'll see you guys next time.